Okay, so we started doing this lower bounds based on communication complexity. We introduced the notion of cooperative games or communication games. And after defining some basic set of how the protocol is defined and things like that. So one question which Ferrer asked last time, which I went and checked around, is that what is it meaning that two players agree on the protocol with each other? Which actually essentially means that basically Bob could know the algorithm which Alice is going to use, and Alice probably could know the algorithm which Bob is going to use. Okay, so this they can pre-decide everything. But what they cannot decide is that what is an outcome of that algorithm on the input that Alice must send it to Bob. But Bob knows this is an output of this particular algorithm. Okay, okay. So, but for example, if Alice uses some randomness sources, that Bob cannot know, because like if Alice is going to use some private randomness, that Bob cannot know, because Alice is going to do a private coin tossage at that point of time, and then based on that some outcome can come. But as such an algorithm which can say, hey, look, at this point of time, I'm going to do a random coin toss and then proceed. So this algorithm, they could just pre-decide already in advance. So this much set of information can be given to them already in advance. If you notice, the way we are also proving lower bounds for the streaming, how are we proving lower bound? Alice uses the same algorithm A, Bob also uses the same algorithm A. So in some sense, they both have this information that we are going to use the same algorithm A, and like both Alice and Bob. It's just the part of input on which Alice is going to run this algorithm is going to be different, and hence the outcome of that will be different, which needs to be communicated to the Bob. And similarly, whatever Bob is simulating this particular algorithm on his part of the input, is the outcome outcome will be different. But in general, Alice and Bob could very well know each other's algorithm, but still, what is the input X and Y? It is only local to Alice, it is local to Bob. So whatever may be the output of this algorithm will be, that needs to be communicated to Bob. Am I right? So this is the setting in which it works. I hope. So did I answer this question of yours, Ferrer?
Yep. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah. So this much power these protocols have. Okay. So then we saw this private coin model, public coin model, and we stated some lower bounds. Like we defined three specific games, which was equality. Given two strings, are they equal? Two strings over bit strength of length n. Then we had this index game where you are given a string x and a bit y, and you are interested in outputting the bit yth bit of the string x. Then we had this disjointness game where you are given x and y, and you would output y if they are disjoint. And by disjoint, we just mean that the places the one occurs is disjoint at 0 places. So think of this as a sets. So like I could have so the way to think of this x and y as like some subset of universe 1 to n, and these are like characteristic vector of that. So two sets are disjoint if the items they contain are, or the elements they contain are disjoint. Okay. Okay. So then we set up this the known results with respect to this game. So equality for the deterministic, we had an lower bound of n. For equality in one-way randomized, also we had order log n and order 1, which Venkatesh asked last time whether is there an easy proof. So we'll start with the proof to that. And then we had index, and index, while for one round protocol, like one-way protocol was n, but if you allow 2-round protocol, it had an upper bound of log n. And for disjointness, irrespective of rounds you perform, the lower bound is omega n number of bits. Okay, so and based on these starting from these lower bounds, we related it to streaming lower bounds and use these connections to prove for example, that majority requires omega minimum of n comma m space, then we gave a reduction from disjoint for connectedness to show that it will need omega n by p space if you are doing p rounds. Then we gave, I recall, we also did perfect matching requires omega n square space, and so on and so forth. So we will see some more lower bounds today and some more starting problems, which I think could be useful for our problems also of interest. Okay, but let me first start with giving you this two interesting algorithm for. Okay, so what I would like to show. Okay, so today is 2nd December.
So Saket,
Yes.
there is no multi-pass lower bound for perfect matching because you are using index to reduce. So.
No, Venkatesh. Like, oh, you mean there are, but they are very sophisticated. Let me say in the following sense: you could save some space if you do certain number of rounds. You could save some space, okay. Right? So there is a round and space kind of this thing. So you can actually get n to the power 2 minus some function of rounds, lower bound.
Okay, by rounds you mean then passes.
Sorry, by passes, yes. So there is an explicitly lower bound of the form n to the power 2 minus function of passes.
Okay.
Okay. So for example, so you could do that, but that is very complicated reduction. I mean, that uses like this Russo-Zemerity graphs in their reductions and like quite non-trivial actually.
Okay.
But there does exist such a lower bound. Okay. So the theorem which I would like to first prove today is that R private one-way communication protocol of equation of n, like equality of n, is order log n. Okay. So recall that Alice has x, Bob has y, and f of x y is equal to 1 if x equal to y. Okay. So what do you think they can do to start with? Okay. So what they do is that they both agree on a field f of, say, size order n square, for example. Okay. And like some finite field, say some finite field. Okay. Now, does it ring some bell? Okay. So what we will going to do now, P tilde is going to be following evaluation. Okay, I'll tell you what this R is. So basically, summation I going from 1 to n, xi ri. Okay, so if we had a polynomial phi x z, summation I equal to 1 to n xi zi. Okay, so and what is R? R is uniformly at random selected from F. Okay, so basically P tilde is an evaluation of phi x z at R. Okay, of course in the field. Okay. Okay. So now, what will Alice send to Bob? Send first R, secondly P tilde. Okay. How much space it will take? Sorry, how many bits rather than a space, this is wrong. How many bits it will take? So R is going to be some order log n, and P tilde is also going to be order log n, right? So this is going to, I'm going to send order log n bits, right? So what I have done, I'm thinking of my input as kind of polynomial. I have evaluated that polynomial at certain point, okay, and I'm sending to Bob that particular evaluation as well as the point at which I have evaluated. Okay. Now, what does Bob do? What does Bob do? Bob is going to just do. It's going to look at phi y r, going to evaluate phi y r. If phi y r is equal to P tilde, it is going to return equality. That's it. Okay. So is the protocol clear, right? So what did Alice did? So they both agreed on a finite field of size order n square. Okay. Now what Alice did, Alice uniformly at random chooses an element of the field, say that R, looks at the polynomial phi xz, evaluates his polynomial at R, and sends two things to the Bob. One, the R at which it has evaluated the polynomial, and P tilde. So for example, both of them know the polynomial they are going to evaluate. So this is what I mean, that both are aware that we are going to evaluate this particular polynomial. So not only both agree on a field F, they also agree on phi xz, the polynomial, right? Okay, so like, I mean, yeah. What they are going to do, the polynomial which they are going to evaluate, they all know, both of them know. Okay, so this is a polynomial they both agree on, that, okay, I'm going to have a polynomial which is nothing but dot product of x dot z1, z2, this thing you're going to do to your input, and you send me this. Based on this, I'm going to output this. Okay, now let us see the success probability. Okay, if x is going to be equal to y, Bob is going to output 1 with probability 1. Okay, if x is not equal to y, okay, Bob may output 1 wrongly, but this happens only if phi xr is equal to phi yr, that is, r is the root of the non-zero polynomial phi x minus y comma z, right? But what is this? This is a polynomial of degree n, which implies this has at most n roots, which implies that probability we make mistake is less than equal to n over n square, which is less than equal to 1 over n, which implies success probability is at least 1 over n minus. This is a success probability, right? So basically, by doing this fingerprinting, this is basically fingerprinting. There's nothing more to it. This is fingerprinting, right? So basically what we are able to show that, well, if we allow randomization, if we allow deterministic and we want to check equality, then we can't do much. But if we allow randomization in order log n bits of communication, we can succeed with probability 1 minus 1 over n. And this n is in our hand. So for randomization, we only need 1/3 probability. So even if we had a slightly larger field, it would have been great. But n is could be much larger than this. So is the proof clear? Okay. So this is in the model of pi-Bitcoin. What is a pi-Bitcoin model? In the sense that the R which Alice is going to use for its algorithm is private to it. Of course, whatever it uses, it can send, which it did as a part of its communication. But now let's do, how will we do this public model? Okay. So the theorem next theorem which I would like to prove is the following. That R public model equality of n is order 1. Okay. Any idea how can we go about it? So now they both can agree what random strings they're going to use, for example. I mean, we have seen this several times. I think the first lecture we did both of these things. Okay, so if you recall correctly, if I wanted to check whether two matrices are equal or not, what did we do? Suppose, so do you recall what I mean to say? You're given two matrices A and B, and I want to check whether A is equal to B or not. And I don't want, sorry, rather, suppose you are given, let's say, A, B is equal to C or not, right? One thing is that I can multiply A, B and check entry-wise there C or not. But we also saw an interesting way to check whether AB equal to C or not in order n square time. Do you recall this? Of course, that was a randomized algorithm.
Compute AB x for some random vector x.
Correct. So what we did last time was that we collected x from some 0, 1 to the power n, and we computed ABX and computed C of x and checked whether ABX equal to CX or not. Okay, so we are just going to do exactly the same kind of strategy. Okay, so now what will happen is that Alice and Bob agree on, say, 2 random strings because they need to boost their probability, nothing more. 2 random strings R, R prime in 0, 1 to the power n. Okay, so they agreed. Like they uniformly at random pick 2 strings R and R prime in 0, 1 to the power n, and they agree on these 2 random strings. And they also agree that what Alice will do. So now what Alice does, Alice sends Bob the following thing. Rx mod 2 r prime x mod 2, right? So how many bits Alice sends to Bob? Actually 2 bits. That's it. 0 and 1 or 1 or 0. This is it. This is all that Alice does, sends to Bob. Now, what does Bob do? Bob knows what Alice has sent. And so Bob outputs 1 if and only if Rx equal to Ry mod 2 and R prime X equal to R prime Y mod 2. Okay, so now Bob might need to know whether the first bit is with R or R prime, so they can probably use some notation. For R we will use 0, and so that is why probably they need to send order 1 bits, right? So like pair, like some R and the bit, R prime and bit, but for R and R prime they can say R is first, R prime is second, and use small number of bits to distinguish between R and prime. So now Y knows that which bit is for R prime, so Ry computes this and checks it. And similarly, it looks at Ry mod 2, looks at R prime Y mod 2, and if they're equal to Rx mod 2 and R prime X mod 2, then says that X equal to Y. Okay, so protocol is this. So what did Alice did? Alice computed Rx mod 2, computed R prime X mod 2, and sent the bits to Bob. Okay, for example, they could have decided the first bit will be Rx, second bit will be R prime X, then just 2 bits are sufficient. Anyway, now Bob looks at first bit. I know it has come from Rx. It computes Ry mod 2, checks whether they are same or not. If they are same, then it goes and evaluates R prime Y and checks with the bit which is corresponding to R prime X. If they are both of these tests passes, then Bob outputs that yes, it is equality. Otherwise, it says that X and Y are different. Okay. So now notice what happens. Indeed, if X equal to Y, okay, this protocol succeeds with probability 1. Okay. However, if X is not equal to Y, then they succeed if and only if X minus Y comma R is 0 mod 2 and X minus Y comma R prime is equal to 0 mod 2. Okay, let's focus on the first one. Focus on first. Okay, we know that X is not equal to Y implies there exists at least one bit, say I, where where X minus Y comma I is a non-zero entry, right? Because one will be 1, other will be 0, or one will be 0, other will be 1. Okay, so then we can write X minus Y comma R equal to Xi minus Yi time Ri plus J not equal to I Xj minus Yj Rj. Now notice, for any conditioning of summation j not equal to I Xj minus Yj Rj, Xj, this, for any conditioning of this, Xi minus Yi Ri, okay, either flips the sum or keeps it, flips the sum or keeps it same modulo 2 with equal probability, right? Because how are we going to choose this R and R prime uniformly at random? We are going to select each bit with probability half, 0 or 1, okay? So what does this imply? This implies that probability that x minus y comma R is equal to 0 is at most half. Actually, it is going to be equal to half, okay? This implies Bob fails with probability exactly half times half, because it has fails with because it is failing with both R as well as R prime, which is like say 1/4, which is less than 1/3. Okay, and so now we have shown the desired success probability. Okay, so basically this algorithm is based on two very simple fundamental ideas we learn in randomized algorithm. One is this idea of fingerprinting, and secondly was this idea of equality, which we can do by choosing two random strings, choosing a random string, evaluating my object on both those random strings, and see if the equality happens or not. Okay. Any question? Okay, so now
Saket,
I want, yes?
so here, this probability is a constant, right? Like we cannot make it like very high. Like
No, we cannot. For example, if we wanted as a function of n, for example, then we need to choose log in many random r's.
Okay. So,
yes.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay.
No, I thought you were saying something. Like here, but what we are showing is like on one side, the probability is exactly 1, and on the other side, the probability is at least constant.
Yes, so, of success probability.
Yeah, so like we could do like a very lame thing, right? Like we can just randomly output 0 or 1, and that will also give kind of at least constant probability. Like it will not be exactly 1 probability on one side though, but it will still be a constant probability.
Why?
Right?
Why?
So like the output can be either 0 or 1, right? So if I just
but look, I have an x and I have a y, yeah. Right? Okay, so you are just saying that okay, whatever maybe I don't care. I will say that it is equal 0 or 1, like it is equal. But what is the point? For every xy, you need to succeed. Okay, wait. Okay, so maybe you are right, but what will be that probability? Probability of success is going to be half.
Yes, yeah.
But I need to probability of success to be say at least 2/3.
Yeah, then it will not work. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So maybe this is the reason why probably people make 1/3. They wish to have a probability of error upper bounded by 1/3.
Yeah. So something bounded away. Okay.
Something bounded away from half.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Thanks.
Welcome.
So one observation is you don't need x and y to be actually bit string, no? X and y can even take values from some I mean, each xi can be an integer
It could be integer, yes.
for the whole thing to go through, right? For both.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to now show some other lower bounds. So I want to say that any one pass algorithm to determine if undirected, unweighted graph G with n vertices contains triangle even with randomization requires omega n squared space. Okay, so if we wish to detect whether a graph contains a triangle or not, okay, it will require us to what do you call it? It requires omega n squared space. Okay, so for the proof, we are going to give a reduction from index, but n square. Okay, so we know that it has an input x comma y. X is 0 comma 1 n square, y is a coordinate in n square, and need to output xyth bit of x. Okay, I'm also going to assume that we have this function from n cross n to n square that is 1 to 1. Okay, some function, and we already saw that such a function exists. This is just for, okay. So now what Alice is going to do, Alice is going to create some part of edges. Bob is going to create some part of the edges based on its input. Okay. Now, what is Alice going to do is very simple. So I have left, I have right, okay, and I have u1 to un, v1 to vn, and we are going to give an edge. Okay, add an edge ua comma vb if x of fa comma b is equal to 1. So if the corresponding bits are like a corresponding bit AB, like f of AB is going to map it to some 1 to n squared. If the corresponding bit is 1, then you put an edge between those indices. Okay. And what is B going to do? What is Bob going to do? Bob is not going to add far too many edges, except now it is going to say, well, let f of I comma j is equal to y. So this is a pair which maps to y. So let's here is I, here is a j. Okay. Now f is going, it is going to add a new vertex s and going to add edge si and sj. That's it. So this is your end of your construction. Okay. Now let's look at the proof. Notice that without s, the graph constructed is bipartite, right? In particular, triangle free. Okay, so this implies every triangle must pass through S. Okay, now what is the degree of S? Degree of S is 2, implies the triangle must contain the edge SUI and SVJ, right? So if there is a triangle, it must contain, because it's a cycle and S has just degree 2 in the graph. Then what do we get from here? Then G has a triangle if and only if UIVJ is in EA. And why will this be happen? If and only if X F I comma J is equal to 1, which is if and only if XY is equal to 1, because Fij is nothing but maps to Y, right? So all I'm saying to you that now you do this construction and you add edge from S to I and J. Now, if without S, this graph is triangle free. But the moment I add S, right, the graph may not be triangle free. Okay, or because without S, this graph is bipartite, but when I add S, this graph is not triangle free. So, which means that every triangle must pass through S, and S has degree 2 in this graph. It means any cycle, and in particular this triangle, must contain SI edge and SJ edge. So, the only possibility of having a triangle is if there's an edge between UI and VJ here. Okay. Right, and then that is if and so if there's a triangle, then I know that the XY bit is 1, right? So by testing whether the graph has a triangle or not, I can say whether the bit the YH bit is 1 or not. If it is not a triangle, I will say it is 0. If it has a triangle, I will say it is 1. Okay, so this immediately implies an omega n square lower bound. So I have a next question. Does this also imply lower bound on bipartiteness? Bipartiteness testing in streaming. Should this imply? Is it possible that this reduction also implies that testing bipartiteness requires omega n squared space?
I thought so, yeah. No?
Yeah, let's think. If this is, suppose this is bipartite, can we conclude that there is an edge between Vi and Vj?
No, if it's bipartite, we can conclude that there is no edge between Vi and Vj, right?
Correct. So, yeah, so it says not bipartite, right? from there, can we conclude there's an edge between Vi, Vj? It could be that there is no edge between Vi, Vj, but there is still an odd cycle in this graph, which uses S, Vi, Vj, like longer odd cycle.
Sure. Okay.
Okay. Okay. So like something just to notice. But more fundamentally, we had shown an upper bound of order n log n bits in insertion, like in deterministically in insertion, deterministic insertion, and same number of bits even for the even for dynamic, but that was randomized, dynamic, right? When we consider this double cover of the graph and all we cared about the number of connected components, right? So,
Okay.
right? So we did had a non-trivial algorithm to test. Okay, test. So, yeah. So there's a difference between testing triangle freeness and the testing bipartiteness. So, okay. So now, but we did have this nice lower bound of order n log n. Okay. So let me introduce. Okay. Okay. So there's a very nice paper in 2015 by Tight. This paper is called Tight Bounds for Graph Problems in Insertion String. Okay, by Xiaoming Sun and Woodruff. It was, I think, approx random 2015. Okay, so if you notice, last time we saw a lower bound on connectivity, for example. Yeah, this was a connectivity algorithm, if you recall correctly. And we showed that any edge insertion model must use omega n by p space. So if I put p equal to 1, it only tells us omega n bits lower bound. But the upper bound which we have is like n log n, because even in the insertion stream, all we can do is output the forest, right? And from here, we can derive the lower bound for bipartiteness also, because it is related to connectivity. So what these people did that, well, not only n, but in fact, n log n bits is a right lower bound. Okay, so we'll show that now. Okay, so the main mantra of this paper is omega n log n bits is necessary and sufficient. Okay, so for graph, the following version, so they introduce a new problem called perm. Okay, so what is the permutation perm problem? So here, Alice gets a permutation sigma of n represented in ordered list as follows. Sigma 1, let's say sigma 1, sigma 2, 2, sigma 3. Okay. And this has n log n bits. Okay. So each of these sigma 1, sigma 2 is represented as log n bits. Okay. Now what does Bob has? Bob has an index y, but now in n log n. Okay. And objective is to know the ith bit of row. So basically what means that don't think of this as like, this is like a log n bit first, next log n bit represents, first log n bit is like sigma 1, next log n bit is sigma 2, next log n bit is sigma 3, so on and so forth. When I say ith bit, like either from the left or the right, fix anything, you want ith bit, like from left, you without worrying about whether this belongs to sigma 1, sigma 2, nothing. Just so after I have written this, I'm going to treat this as an n log n bit string, and I'm going to ask, give me the ith bit of this string. Okay, so this is the problem they studied, and they showed the following for this problem. So the lemma they proved is that one-way communication complexity of like randomized communication complexity of permutation is omega n log n. Okay. Is the problem clear? Like, is the statement of the problem clear? Right? So we are given an n log n bit string, which corresponds to a particular permutation of n, sigma 1, sigma 2, sigma n, and Bob has an index y in n log n, and the objective is to know the ith bit of sigma. Okay. So the theorem, which with the help of this,
sorry, this is a special case of index, right?
In some sense, it is.
Because I mean, index is like you are given an arbitrary n log n bits if you want to think you're
correct.
Whereas
Yes.
here, these n log n bits are some encoding of a permutation.
Encoding, they call it. I think they call it. I forgot the name of this permutation. Like I think useless representation of this permutation or something they call it, but I don't know. But you are right. Yeah. So it is a particular permutation. So like if I look at the first log n bit, second log n bit, third log n bit, and construct the number, it will give me a permutation of 1 to n. So you are right in that sense. You are right that this is a special form of index. Okay, and we will make use of this, like this special property to prove our lower bounds. Okay, so the first theorem I like to prove with the help of this, that one-way communication complexity of connectivity is omega n log n. So, or in other words, we can say any one pass randomized streaming algorithm. So in particular, deterministic algorithm requires omega n log n space to solve connectivity. Okay. So this is what I would like to prove now. So here's our proof. The style of the proof from this problem is very similar for all the problems. So we will be able to understand. So now, so I'm going to give a reduction from perm to connectivity. Okay. So now we are going to give a reduction from here perm and instances comes from permutation of n by 2. Okay, so like it's sum 1 to n by 2. Okay, so believe that n is divisible by 2. Okay, so I need probably more space. So here's going to be a graph constructed. This is going to be some bipartite graph constructed with L and R. 1, 2, n by 2. This is also going to be 1, 2, n by 2. And how do you think we are going to give this edges? We are going to give edges. So Alice has this row. So it is going to give edges I comma sigma I, right? So this is like, this I maps to which sigma I, okay? So what does Alice adds? Alice actually adds a perfect matching, right? And now what does Bob does? Suppose Bob has index y to perm. So what is now Bob can compute? What does this corresponds to? So it says, okay, this corresponds to nth bit of sigma j for some j in n by 2. So looking at what bit it is, it can compute. Okay, fine. Which block does it goes to? So that is like j. That is, so if it goes to the block j, it is like sigma j, and like it can subtract from y j log n and get to the nth bit of that, right? So this is how it can get. So Bob, looking at index y, can identify the following thing. It's an nth bit of sigma j. So it is an nth bit of sigma j for some j in n by 2. Okay, so by looking at its own y, it can determine these two objects. Now, what does Bob do? It adds a vertex w. Okay, adds a vertex. Now, what he does? Adds a vertex w. Adds edges to everyone in L but to j, right? So W is going to be okay. So everybody else, it gives a match edge, but not to j. Okay, and what else does W adds to? W also adds edges to the following thing. Okay. Let F be subset of R such that corresponding vertices nth bit is equal to 0. Okay, so it looks at all these 1 to n by 2 here in the right, because these are still a number, and this is S. What is the property of this? This is nth bit is set to 0, and W is going to give an edge to all these guys. This is it. So this is the end of the construction. What I want to show now, I want to show the following. G is connected if and only if and only if there is an edge between Mhm. If and only if there is an edge between W and sigma j. Okay, and which is if and only if, we'll prove this, if and only if lth bit of sigma j is 0. Now notice what happens. Okay. So let's see what happens if the lth bit of sigma j is 0. Let's see what happens if lth bit of sigma j is 0. Now notice here what happens is that W is connected to everybody else here, and W is also connected to S here, right? Now every other vertex here except J, right, is connected to everybody else by their matching partner, right? So everything is connected now except what about J, because W has no neighbors to J. But if the corresponding bit here is 0, W has an edge to that, and that has an edge to J, so that everything gets connected. Okay. Now imagine that jth bit is not 0, right? So this is how you prove connectedness. So if say lth bit of sigma j is 1, then what happens? Let's see. Now I know that, look, in the beginning we had a perfect matching. Okay, so now let's consider j and say sigma j is 2. So we have this edge. We have this edge. Now j is not connected to W. Fine. But what about 2? 2 is also not connected to W because the lth bit of 2 is 1, which implies that 2 is isolated, and it is like this J2 is one component. So the whole graph is not connected. Okay. So this just implies that, and we started with, yeah. So what does this imply? This implies that we have an omega n log n lower bounds because of this particular reduction from perm for the connectivity problem. Okay. So this gives us omega n log n lower bound. Okay. So now let's do bipartiteness. Is this reduction clear, or do we need more explanation? Okay. So I tell you more. That bipartiteness, even with randomization, require omega n log n space in streaming. Okay, so we are again going to give a proof from perm to bipartite. Yes. And again, our input is going to be Alice has input from, as before, it is going to be instances from n by 2. Okay. And so as before, I'm going to construct this bipartite graph to start with n by 2, n by 2. Okay, and what does Alice does? Adds the edge. Again, a perfect matching. Okay. But now, okay, but what does Bob do? So Bob again derives from Y. Okay, this is like lth bit of sigma j for some j in n by 2. Okay. So suppose this is j and this is my w, adds w, now adds the edge wj, and what else he does? It again makes the same S. Okay, what is the property of say S? Lth bit is set to 0. And this is your end of the construction. Okay. Now, okay. So what happens now? Notice that if you look at the edge JW, delete the edge JW, okay? Then I claim that this graph is actually not only bipartite, it is cycle free. There is no cycle. Is this true? Because what you have is a perfect matching, you put W other side, then it is just looking into some edges, right? And so think of this like so without this edge JW, I add W to some guys here, and from there some perfect matching is going out. So in fact, this is cycle free. Okay, so delete the edge JW, the graph is cycle free. Okay. Now, okay, so I'm going to claim that this graph has the following property, that actually G has an odd cycle if and only if it has a triangle. Right? Because notice that Wj edge is definitely going to be used in this odd cycle, or for that matter, any cycle. And if suppose this goes outside, if this edge goes outside from J to sigma J edge goes outside, what does it mean? Then this graph has absolutely no cycle. Okay, forget about odd cycle. So if it has an odd cycle, so it must have, or rather think of this way. Okay, so if I delete the SJW, okay, if I delete the edge JW, this graph is a forest or something. Now in the forest, if you add a unique edge, you're going to get a unique cycle, right? So this graph is acyclic plus one edge, right? So it means it has a unique cycle. So if I can show that that cycle is triangle, then that's perfectly fine, because if this is an odd cycle, this is a triangle. If it is like any cycle, it is that triangle which is going to form a cycle. So now notice, how can this graph can have a cycle? Well, the graph can only have a cycle if the edge J rho J, like this edge rho J, what do you call it? Rho J is an element of S. which is if and only if, okay, lth bit of row j is 0. Yes, yeah, right. This is what we do, right? So from here, what can be, and if this is, then this is actually a triangle, cycle, odd cycle, everything. So from here, what can we say? That so now I can say that G has a cycle if and only if G has an odd cycle, if and only if there is an if and only if there is if and only if lth bit of sigma j is 0. That's it. So this also tells us another thing, that if you wanted to test cycle freeness, we need omega n log n bits. Okay, and how can you? So suppose if you had an insertion model, how will you test whether a graph has a cycle or not? Well, you just store n edges. Then if you have more than n edges, then you know that the graph has a cycle. Otherwise, you have at most n-1 edges, and you can keep all of them, and that will take n log n bits. So in that sense, this is tight. Okay. So let me do one more reduction, but now this time not from perm, but this problem is more akin to showing slightly non-trivial lower bounds for graph problems. Okay, so this is called graph index. Okay, I'm going to call it. Okay, so what is the problem? Alice has a bipartite graph G with partition A disjoint union B N, and Bob has some A comma B in A times B. And what is the goal? Wants to test whether A comma B is in easy or not. Okay, so in this problem, Alice holds a bipartite graph and Bob has an index A comma B. Okay, Bob wants to know whether this A comma B, the pair which holds, does this has an edge or not? Okay, so what do you think? What should be the lower bound for this problem? Any guess?
N square?
Yes, it is n square. And it is basically, if you notice, it is like this is something which we have been using all the time up until now when we were trying to do any proof actually. So proof is basically reduction from index, and you're given x comma y. So let's not say square. I think this is better. And y is n squared. F is a function from n cross n square. Okay. And what do you think Alice should do? Well, it makes this bipartite graph A1 to AN, B1 to Bn, and what does it does? It adds AI, Bj, and H if x fi comma j is 1. So if the corresponding ij bit is 1, so what does Bob do? What will Bob have? What will Bob has an index. It's an index, right? So Bob has some y in the square, right? So let I comma j be such that f of I comma j is y, right? Okay. So what will Bob keep? AI bj is its index. And this is nothing but clearly xi equal to 1 if and only if AI bj is in edge, right? So this is basically a translation of index to the graph problem. There's nothing more surprising happening here. Okay, but this is a very it seems to be a very useful problem to show lower bound. So right, in the way index is a very useful problem to show lower bound for most of the problems. Similarly, graph index problem seems to have good properties to show lower bound for the graph problem. Okay, so reduction is fairly simple, and this is all that it is. Okay, so now let me show using this. It's just this proof might be slightly messy than previous ones, but not much. So this is a theorem which we want to say that any one pass streaming algorithm, even with randomness, to test whether a graph is chordal, requires omega n squared space. Okay. In fact, what this will imply that, okay, you will see. In fact, whether a graph is split plus one edge requires this load. I think so. Let's see. Okay, so this is our goal. So I want to give a one-pass streaming algorithm. For chordal detection, I want to give an omega n squared lower bound. Okay. So the proof is going to be from graph index n, right? So now look, graph index on n requires omega n squared. So now if I give a normal reduction from index to my problem, automatically I will have a lower bound of omega n squared. Okay. So what is the input of G index? Alice has this bipartite graph. Let's say A1 to AN, B1 to Bn, A comma B. Okay. Now, so this is a part of the input of Alice, and Bob will have some index, and let's say Bob has an index AI Bj in A times B. So this is what Alice has, this is what Bob has. Now what Alice does, so let's call this graph G. So Alice is going to create a graph H, where vertex set of H is going to be A union B, union xi, yi, I in 1, 2. So I add some more vertices. Now, Alice adds the edges of G to H. So that's the first thing does, that whatever the edges was in G, I just add them. And Alice makes A union X a clique. Okay. So picturesquely, this is how it will look like. So this is, you have A, this is, you have B, this is G here. I added some X, let's call them X1 to Xn, B1 to Bn. Okay. And this is like A1 to An, okay. And what did okay, so this is a whole clique. This is a whole clique. This colored part is the clique. Okay. So this is what Alice does. Alice also adds some more edges. Okay. Adds the edge there's something wrong I did. Okay. Alice adds edge xr yr prime, like here, r not equal to r prime. So you give all the edge, but maybe this edge. So except a perfect matching, you add everything between x and y. So this is what happened here up until now. Now, what does Bob do? Okay. So Bob does the following. Okay. It has AI and BJ, right? If you recall, he knows this AI and BJ. What it does is that it adds an edge. So okay, let me AI BJ BB. This is AI. This is BJ. Our interest will be XI and YJ also. So what it does, Bob, it adds the following edges. It adds the edge this edge, and this edge. Okay, so adds the following: AI adds edges AI, YI. Second edge it adds YI, BJ, and BJ, XR, R in N. And what else does it adds? It adds from BJ all these edges. Okay? So is the construction clear? Right? So what did we do? We started with like all the so if you look at the A and B, first added all the edges of G. Then we made this A union X a clique, and we made between X and Y all the edges but a perfect matching. And in B, we just added like BJ, YI, the only edge we added, and from BJ we made it like universal to every vertex in X. So what can we say from here? Notice that if we delete BJ, YI, then it is a split graph, right? With partition, A union X being a clique, and B union Y being an independent set. Okay? So, what we can prove now is the following. H is a chordal graph if and only if AI, BJ is in edge of G. Okay? Okay? So this is our construction, and from this construction we can show that H is a chordal graph if and only if AI, BJ, this particular edge AI, BJ, this particular edge so presence of AI, BJ will determine whether we have whether it's a chordal graph or not. So for example, let's look at one direction. Okay, so now consider the following cycle. Suppose you consider AI, YI, so where I'm considering AI, YI, BJ, AI, YI, BJ, and then where should I go? I go to XI. Okay, so consider this. Consider the cycle. I start from AI, I go to YI, I have an edge BJ, so I go to edge BJ. From BJ, I can go to anybody, so I go to XI and I go back to AI because this is a clique, right? So what I know from here, right? So definitely see the cycle, right? See the cycle. Okay, and what else do we know? We know that so look at this cycle. What did we do? So here I have AI, here I have XI, here I have YI, here I have BJ. So this is how the cycle goes. Okay? Is this correct? AI, YI, AI. No, this is not. Yeah. No, this is not correct. This is not correct. This is wrong cycle. Sorry. AI, XI, YI, BJ. So this is how the cycle goes. Okay, this is how the cycle is. Now, what else do we know? We know that xi, yi is not an edge, right? This is not an edge by our construction. Now, it means whether C is an induced cycle or not depends on AIBJ. What I mean by this, so if AIBJ is not an edge, implies C is a what do you call, induced cycle, which implies H is not a caudal graph. Okay. Okay. Now, so if AIBJ is not an edge, then I have showed you a induced cycle, and hence H is not a caudal graph. Now, I want to show that suppose AIBJ is an edge. Okay. And for contradiction, assume that H is not caudal. Right? Now, you just now saw that H minus Bj Yj, Bj Yi is a split graph. Right? So, in particular, this is a caudal graph. This implies that if H is not caudal, then the induced cycle must contain the edge Bj Yi. Okay. So some points in order. Can I have a chordless cycle of length 5 in this graph? Well, if we have a chordless cycle of length 5, then see, since it's kind of bipartite graph, so look, I can't have 3 vertices from the left side because in that chordless cycle, because this is a clique. So I can only have 2 vertices from here. But can I have a 3 vertex from here? Right? So you understand my point? So let's look at this. Can I have a 3 vertices from here? Look, I have this edge, right? So because whatever may be, let's look at this. So maybe I can go like this, but then I have to go like this. I have to go like this. Okay. So the moment, so first of all, to notice that, look, if at all you are going to use any chordless cycle, you are going to use 2 vertices from the right side, then you have to use them consecutively. And the moment you use them consecutively, you can show that you cannot have even 3 vertices from the right side. So so basically, if you have an induced cycle, that induced cycle must be of length 4. Okay. Now, because this graph is a split graph, okay, after deleting this edge, the structure looks like as follows. So the structure is going to look like, okay. So let me draw this Bj, Yi, and here. Okay. Now let's suppose this is a chordless cycle, and then there are going to be 2 vertices from here, q comma q prime, like this. So now let's ask ourselves, okay. So let's see. We have a cycle, say Q, Bj, Q prime, Yi. Okay. Now, notice here that is this possible at all? Right? Because Bj is adjacent to every vertex in X. So if two vertices from Q and Q prime will happen, then you will get this edge between Q prime and Bj. So it is definitely true that not both vertices can belong to X. At least one vertex must go to the top part, which implies that at least the picture looks like, say, now, say, okay. Okay. So what does this imply? That this Q prime belongs to A. So I think the picture. Now look at this Q prime. Q prime is adjacent to Yi. What is the meaning of this? I think I have messed myself. Wait. Not something that hard. Okay. So whatever may be, I think I have drawn not correctly. This is not the picture which should be drawn here. I think this is why it's creating it. Okay. The picture is like this. Like this. Q prime is going to be A, because if Q prime is going to be here, like this. Okay. Now, Yi is adjacent. Which vertex Yi is adjacent, if you recall correctly from here? Yi is adjacent to right? So look, from this part, the Yi is only adjacent to Ai. That's the only edge which it has, Yi has from the A side, which Bob had added, Ai, Yi. So this implies, okay, that's, okay, now we are done. So this implies that Q prime is in A, which implies that Q prime is equal to Ai, right? So if Q prime is equal to Ai, okay, and what else do we know? we know by our construction that AI bj is an edge, which implies that this edge is present in my graph, which implies that the induced cycle we started with doesn't exist. Okay, so some hiccup, but it's fine. Okay, so what we have been able to show that if AIBA is an edge, then whatever the graph is caudal, and if AIBA is not an edge, then graph is not caudal. So we have been able to show now that H is a caudal graph, if and only if AI bj is in edge. And notice that the construction of this graph is like just one edge away from the split graph, right? So even for this family of graphs, detecting whether detecting whether a graph is split plus one edge or not requires omega n squared space. And if you recall, for split graph, we can do it in omega n log n bits. So all I wanted to say that you can prove some interesting lower bounds starting from this graph index problem for various graph classes recognition, possibly. Okay, so I think this is all that I wanted to tell for lower bounds. And next week we will do some random selection of topics and probably end the course on next Wednesday. Okay, any question? Otherwise, we are done for the today's lecture. Any question?
So can you show one more time your reduction for triangle freeness?
Okay, sure.
Just
one second. This was the reduction for triangle freeness.
Yes, and lower bound is n log n. Okay.
No, omega lower bound is n square.
N square. Oh yeah. So but then I'm just a bit confused. Can you just use this reduction for the last problem?
For the caudal graph?
Yes. Somehow, well, if you turn one side into a click and add one more vertex there, make it adjacent to everything in the other side, it's somehow you need chord to this triangle.
But caudal graphs can have triangles, no?
No. If you have no edge between VI and VJ, then you are in trouble.
Possibly, you're right. This reduction I did as an exercise today, so maybe we missed it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, if possible, it's possible that starting from here, something simple, interesting. Yeah. Most likely, you're right. Okay, good. Thank you. Yeah. Any other question? Okay, so if there is no other question, then let's meet on Monday. And thank you.